Sometimes the most powerful words come from the smallest voices. In a world where millions of dollars change hands with a simple signature, where luxury cars cost more than most people earn in a lifetime, and where the wealthy live in towers that touch the clouds, it takes just two simple words from a desperate child to shake the foundation of a billionaire's existence. Please buy us. These weren't words spoken in a boardroom or whispered in a business deal. They came from the cracked lips of a 10-year-old girl standing barefoot on a busy street corner, holding her younger brother's hand, looking up at a man whose single watch could feed her family for years. But sometimes, when desperation meets compassion, when innocence touches power, when the forgotten finally find their voice, that's when real magic happens. This is not just a story about money changing hands. This is about how 4 words changed 2 lives forever, and how sometimes the most unexpected encounters become the most beautiful beginnings. What started as a moment of desperation on a crowded street became a journey that would challenge everything a successful man thought he knew about family, love, and what truly matters in life. Get ready to witness how a chance encounter between extreme wealth and heartbreaking poverty created a bond so strong that it redefined the meaning of family itself. The morning sun painted the streets of downtown Chicago in golden hues, but 10-year-old Maya Washington couldn't appreciate its beauty. Her empty stomach cramped with hunger as she clutched her 6-year-old brother Marcus's small hand tighter. They had been walking for hours, searching for any opportunity to earn a few dollars for food. Maya's worn-out sneakers had holes that let in the cold October wind, and Marcus's jacket was 3 sizes too big, a hand-me-down from someone who had taken pity on them weeks ago. Their grandmother, who had been their only guardian since their parents died in a car accident 2 years earlier, had passed away last month from diabetes complications she couldn't afford to treat properly. The city's child services hadn't found them yet, but Maya knew it was only a matter of time. She had heard the stories from other kids on the street about foster homes that separated siblings, about families who only took in children for the government money, about places where kids disappeared and were never heard from again. She would rather die than let anyone separate her from Marcus. He was all she had left in this world, and she was all he had. Every morning when he woke up crying for their grandmother, Maya would hold him close and promise that everything would be okay. She wasn't sure how she would keep that promise, but she knew she would find a way. Today, like every other day for the past 3 weeks, they walked through the business district hoping someone would give them work or spare change. Maya had learned which streets had the kindest people and which ones to avoid. She knew which restaurant threw away the best leftover food and which security guards would chase them away versus those who might slip them $1 or 2. The city was a jungle, and Maya had become a survival expert at 10 years old. She could spot an unmarked police car from 2 blocks away, knew which shelters were safe for children and which ones weren't, and had memorized the schedules of the social workers who patrolled the areas where homeless families gathered. But survival was getting harder each day. Winter was coming, and Maya could see Marcus getting thinner despite her giving him most of whatever food they managed to find. His little face was becoming gaunt, and sometimes he was too tired to walk very far. Last night, he had developed a cough that worried her deeply. As they approached the financial district where men in expensive suits hurried past without making eye contact, Maya spotted something that made her heart race with both hope and terror. A long black car had pulled up to the curb, and a man was stepping out who looked different from the others. Alexander Stone was 45 years old and worth over $3 billion. His technology company had revolutionized online security, and his investments had made him one of the youngest self-made billionaires in American history. He wore custom-made suits that cost more than most people's cars, lived in a penthouse that had been featured on magazine covers, and owned homes in 7 different countries. But despite all his wealth and success, Alexander felt empty inside. He had everything money could buy, but nothing that truly mattered. His ex-wife had left him 3 years earlier, taking their daughter Emma with her to live in London. She had told him that he loved his money more than his family, and maybe she was right. He had missed Emma's birthday parties for board meetings, skipped her school plays for business trips, and chosen conference calls over bedtime stories. Now Emma was 8 years old and barely knew her father. When they talked on video calls twice a week, She was polite, but distant, as if talking to a stranger who happened to share her DNA. His ex-wife had remarried a kind man who took Emma to the park, helped with homework, and showed
Look
up
what
for
I
every important
found.
moment in her
Goodness,
life.
that's extraordinary.
Alexander had
I know,
become
right?
unnecessary in his own daughter's world. The therapist he had started seeing told him that money couldn't fill the void left by meaningful relationships, but Alexander didn't know how to fix what he had broken. He had grown up poor himself, the son of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. He had promised himself that his children would never know poverty the way he had. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that children needed their parents' time and love more than they needed trust funds. As Alexander walked toward his office building, lost in thoughts about his upcoming custody hearing and his lawyer's advice to settle for minimal visitation rights, he almost didn't notice the small girl who stepped directly into his path. Maya took a deep breath and made the most important decision of her young life. She had watched this man get out of his expensive car, seen the way other people on the street looked at him with respect and maybe a little fear, noticed how his clothes and watch probably cost more than her grandmother's entire apartment. This man had the kind of money that could solve all their problems. Most importantly, when he walked past other homeless people, he didn't look at them with disgust or anger like so many others did. His eyes held sadness, as if he understood what it felt like to be lost and alone. Maya had become very good at reading people's faces, and this man's face told her he might actually listen. With Marcus's hand still firmly in hers, Maya stepped directly in front of the tall man in the perfect suit and looked up at him with eyes that held more wisdom and pain than any child should possess. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a voice that was small but clear, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Alexander stopped walking and looked down at the girl in surprise. He was used to people approaching him for money or business opportunities, but this was clearly different. The girl was obviously homeless, her clothes dirty and torn, but her eyes were bright and determined. The little boy beside her looked scared and hungry. "Yes," Alexander said gently, something in the girl's demeanor making him pause instead of hurrying past like he normally would. Maya looked up at this powerful stranger and spoke the words that would change both of their lives forever. "Please buy us." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge connecting 2 completely different worlds. Alexander felt his breath catch in his throat, not because the request was unusual, but because of the way she said it. There was no shame in her voice, no begging or pleading. She had stated it like a simple business proposition, as if she was offering something valuable in return. "What did you say?" Alexander asked, though he had heard her perfectly. "Please buy us," Maya repeated, her chin lifting with dignity that seemed impossible for someone so young and desperate. "We're not asking for charity. We can work. I can clean and cook and take care of things. Marcus is really good at organizing stuff, and he's super smart even though he's only 6. We won't cause any trouble, and we won't ask for anything except a chance." Alexander felt something crack open inside his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. This child wasn't begging. She was negotiating. She was trying to sell their services, their potential, their worth as human beings to someone who might be able to change their circumstances. "What are your names?" he asked, surprising himself by crouching down so he was at eye level with Maya, instead of towering over her. "I'm Maya, and this is my little brother Marcus," she said, her voice steady despite the tears she was fighting back. "We've been taking care of ourselves for almost a month now, ever since our grandmother died. We're good kids, I promise. We just need someone to give us a chance." Marcus, who had been silent and wide-eyed during this entire exchange, suddenly spoke up in a voice so quiet Alexander had to strain to hear him. "My sister takes good care of me," he whispered. "She gives me her food when I'm hungry, and she tells me stories when I can't sleep because I miss Grandma. She's the best sister in the whole world." Alexander felt his carefully constructed walls crumble completely. These children weren't looking for a handout. They were looking for a family, for someone who would see their value beyond their circumstances. Maya was proposing a partnership, offering their loyalty and hard work in exchange for safety and care. He thought about his daughter Emma, living comfortably in London with her mother and stepfather, probably taking for granted that she would always have food and shelter, and people who loved her. He thought about his empty penthouse, his silent dinners, his weekends spent working because he had nowhere else to go and no one who needed him. "Where are you staying?" Alexander asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Different places," Maya said carefully. "Sometimes the shelter has room for kids. Sometimes we find somewhere safe to sleep outside. We're really good at taking care of ourselves." Alexander looked into Maya's eyes and saw himself at her age, scared and hungry but too proud to admit it, trying to take care of his mother and younger sister while his father was in prison, and their world fell apart around them. He remembered the feeling of being invisible to the adults who had the power to help, but were too busy or too overwhelmed to notice one more desperate child. "Are you hungry right now?" he asked. The upscale restaurant Alexander chose was the kind of place where a simple breakfast cost more than Maya and Marcus had seen in weeks. Crystal glasses caught the morning sunlight, and the tables were set with more forks than the children had ever seen in one place. Maya felt completely out of place in her torn clothes and dirty sneakers, but Alexander seemed determined to make them comfortable. "Order whatever you want," Alexander said gently as they settled into a corner booth. "Everything on this menu is excellent." Maya stared at the menu with words she couldn't understand and prices that made her dizzy. She had learned to read well enough, but terms like eggs Benedict and brioche French toast might as well have been in a foreign language. Marcus pressed close to her side, overwhelmed by the fancy surroundings and the attention they were receiving from well-dressed servers. "I don't really know what any of this is," Maya admitted quietly, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. She had tried so hard to seem mature and capable when she approached this man. But now she felt like exactly what she was, a scared 10-year-old who was in way over her head. Alexander studied the children's faces and realized how overwhelming this must be for them. In his world of business dinners and five-star restaurants, he had forgotten what it felt like to be intimidated by a menu. "How about I order for all of us?" he suggested. "I know what's good here, and I'll make sure you get something you'll enjoy." When the server approached, Alexander ordered simple but hearty fare: scrambled eggs, bacon, toast, fresh fruit, and hot chocolate for the children, coffee for himself. As they waited for their food, he tried to think of how to have this conversation. He dealt with billion-dollar negotiations regularly, but talking to two homeless children required a completely different set of skills. "Tell me about your grandmother," Alexander said, sensing that this was a safe place to start. Maya's face immediately softened, and she began to share stories about the woman who had raised them after their parents died. Grandma Rose had been a seamstress who worked from their tiny apartment, taking in alterations and repairs to make ends meet. She had taught Maya how to cook simple meals, how to read and write, and how to always hold her head high no matter what circumstances they faced. "She used to say that being poor doesn't mean being worthless," Maya said, her voice growing stronger as she talked about the woman she had loved so dearly. "She taught me that dignity comes from how you treat people, not from how much money you have." Marcus nodded eagerly, adding his own memories in his small, sweet voice. "Grandma Rose made the best cookies in the whole world, and she never got mad when I spilled things or forgot to put my toys away. She used to read to us every night before bed." Alexander listened intently, recognizing the love and loss in their voices. These children had been truly cherished by their grandmother, and her death had left them completely adrift in a world that seemed to have no place for them. When their food arrived, Alexander watched as Maya immediately started cutting up Marcus's eggs and buttering his toast before touching her own plate. She had clearly been taking care of her little brother for much longer than just the month since their grandmother's death. The protective way she watched him eat, the automatic way she wiped his face and made sure he drank his milk, showed Alexander that this little girl had been forced to become a mother figure far too young. "Maya," Alexander said carefully, "what happens if I can't help you? Do you have any other family or friends who might take you in?" Maya's face grew serious, and she glanced around the restaurant as if making sure no one could overhear them. "There's no one else," she said quietly. "Grandma Rose was our mom's mother, and our mom's dad died before we were born. Our dad's family never wanted anything to do with us after he died. They said he should have married someone from his own background instead of our mom. Alexander felt a familiar anger rise in his chest. He had grown up facing similar prejudices, people who thought his family wasn't good enough because they were poor, because his father had made mistakes, because they lived in the wrong neighborhood. The idea that children were being abandoned because of adult prejudices made his hands clench into fists. "What about school?" Alexander asked. "Have you been able to attend classes?" Maya shook her head sadly. "After Grandma Rose died, we had to leave her apartment because we couldn't pay rent. Without an address, they wouldn't let us stay enrolled. I tried to keep teaching Marcus at home using books from the library, but it's hard when we don't have a quiet place to study or do homework." Alexander was beginning to understand the full scope of what these children had been dealing with. They weren't just homeless. They had been completely cut off from every system that might help them build a better future. Without school, without family support, without even basic identification documents, Maya and Marcus were essentially invisible to society. "Maya," Alexander said, his voice gentle but serious, "I need to ask you something important. Are you sure there's no one else who could help you? No teachers or neighbors or family friends who knew your grandmother?" Maya considered this question carefully. She had learned not to trust adults easily, but something about this man made her want to tell him the truth. "There was Mrs. Patterson from downstairs," she said slowly. "She used to check on Grandma Rose sometimes and bring us soup when we were sick. But she's really old and barely has enough money for herself. And there was Miss Jennifer, my teacher from last year, who always said I was smart and could do anything I wanted. But I don't know how to find her now, and even if I did, I don't think teachers are allowed to take kids home with them." Alexander nodded, understanding the impossible situation these children faced. The adults who might have cared about them were either unable to help or prevented by systems and regulations from getting involved. As they continued eating, Alexander found himself studying Maya's face. Despite everything she had been through, her eyes still held hope. She wasn't bitter or angry. She was determined. She had approached him not with desperation, but with a plan. This child had more strength and resilience than most adults he knew in the business world. "Maya," Alexander said, "what made you decide to approach me specifically? There were other people on the street who might have helped you." Maya looked down at her plate, suddenly shy again. "I watched you for a few minutes before I said anything. Most people, when they see kids like us, they either get angry and tell us to go away, or they look sad and throw money at us, but don't really see us as real people. You looked lonely, like maybe you understood what it felt like to need someone." Alexander felt his breath catch. This 10-year-old had seen through his expensive clothes and powerful reputation to the truth underneath. He was lonely. He was successful and wealthy and admired, but he went to bed every night in an empty house and woke up every morning with no one who truly needed him. "You're very observant," Alexander said with genuine admiration. "That's a valuable skill. What else have you noticed about people during your time on the streets?" Maya brightened at his interest, and she began sharing some of her insights about human nature. She had learned to identify which people were likely to be kind and which ones were dangerous. She could tell when someone was genuinely interested in helping versus when they just wanted to feel good about themselves. She had developed an intuitive understanding of people's motivations that impressed Alexander deeply. As they talked, Marcus gradually became less shy and began adding his own observations. Despite being only 6, he was clearly intelligent and curious about the world around him. He asked thoughtful questions about Alexander's work, about the tall buildings they could see through the restaurant windows, about what it would be like to live in a place where you didn't have to worry about finding food every day. Alexander found himself genuinely enjoying their conversation. These children were engaging and bright, with perspectives shaped by experiences most people would never understand. Maya had a natural leadership quality and protective instinct that reminded him of himself at her age. Marcus had a gentle curiosity and sweet nature that made Alexander want to show him all the wonders the world had to offer. But Alexander also knew that good intentions weren't enough. If he was going to help these children, he needed to think through all the practical and legal implications. He couldn't just take them home like stray pets, no matter how much he might want to. There were systems in place, procedures that had to be followed, laws that had to be respected. Maya, Alexander said carefully, I want you to know that I'm very impressed by both of you. You're smart and brave and clearly love each other very much. I would like to help you, but I need to do some research first to make sure I handle this the right way. Would you be willing to stay somewhere safe for a day or two while I figure out the best way to proceed? Maya's face immediately became guarded. She had heard promises from adults before, and she knew that somewhere safe usually meant foster care and separation from Marcus. What kind of place? She asked suspiciously. Because we're not going to any place that's going to split us up. I don't care what happens to me, but Marcus stays with me. Alexander could see the fierce protectiveness in her eyes and realized he needed to be very clear about his intentions. I was thinking of a hotel, he said. A nice one, with room service and cable television. Just for you two, together, while I consult with some lawyers and social workers about the best way to help you permanently. I would make sure you had everything you needed, and I would check on you every day. Maya and Marcus exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that siblings who have been through trauma together can have with just their eyes. We stay together no matter what. Maya asked. You stay together no matter what, Alexander promised. That's non-negotiable. And you're not just going to dump us there and disappear? Maya pressed, her voice carrying the weight of too many broken promises from adults who had let her down. Maya, Alexander said, leaning forward so she could see the sincerity in his eyes. I give you my word that I'm not going to disappear. This isn't about me feeling good about myself for helping you once and then forgetting about you. This is about figuring out how to make a real, permanent change in your lives. Maya studied his face for a long moment, using all the skills she had developed for reading people's true intentions. Something in Alexander's eyes convinced her that he was different from the other adults who had made promises they couldn't keep. Okay, she said quietly. But if you break your promise, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. Alexander smiled at her serious tone. I would be very disappointed in myself too, he said. And I don't like disappointing people I care about. As they finished their breakfast and prepared to leave the restaurant, Alexander realized that his life had just taken a dramatic turn. 12 hours ago, his biggest concern had been a board meeting about quarterly projections. Now he was committed to helping 2 homeless children rebuild their lives, and he had no idea how to do it. But for the first time in years, Alexander felt truly alive. He had a purpose beyond making money, a challenge that actually mattered. These children needed him not for his wealth, but for his commitment, his protection, his presence in their lives. As they walked toward his car, Maya reached out and took his hand, a gesture of trust that nearly brought tears to his eyes. Marcus slipped his small hand into Alexander's other hand, and suddenly, the powerful billionaire felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The hotel suite Alexander arranged for them was the nicest place. Alexander barely slept that night. He spent hours on his computer researching adoption laws, foster care requirements, and guardianship procedures. What he discovered made his heart sink. The legal system wasn't designed for situations like this. He couldn't simply decide to help 2 homeless children and bring them home. There were investigations, background checks, home studies, and court proceedings that could take months or even years. Worse yet, Maya and Marcus would likely be placed in emergency foster care while the system slowly ground through its processes. There was no guarantee they would be placed together, and no guarantee that Alexander would ever be approved to care for them. His demanding work schedule, frequent travel, and lack of experience with children could all work against him. The next morning, Alexander called his personal lawyer, David Chun, who had handled everything from business mergers to his divorce proceedings. David was brilliant, discreet, and unflappable, but even he seemed surprised by Alexander's new priority. Let me understand this correctly, David said over the phone. You want to adopt 2 homeless children you met yesterday on the street. I want to help them, Alexander corrected. Adoption might be the end goal, but right now I just want to make sure they're safe and together. Alexander, I need to be very clear with you about what you're getting into. The Department of Children and Family Services doesn't just hand over custody to wealthy strangers, no matter how good their intentions are. These children will be placed in the system while investigations are conducted. The process is designed to be thorough, not fast. Alexander felt his frustration mounting. David, these kids have been living on the streets for a month. Every day they're out there, they're in danger. Maya is 10 years old, and she's been taking care of herself and her 6-year-old brother like she's his mother. They need help now, not 6 months from now. I understand your urgency, David said patiently. But the system exists to protect children from people who might harm them. You have to prove that you can provide a stable, safe environment. That means home studies, psychological evaluations, financial reviews, background checks, and references from people who can vouch for your character. How long does all of that take? Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. If we move quickly and everything goes perfectly, 3 to 6 months minimum. More realistically, 8 months to a year. And that's assuming you're approved, which isn't guaranteed. Alexander ended the call feeling defeated. He had promised Maya and Marcus that he would help them, but the very system designed to protect children seemed determined to keep them in limbo. When Alexander arrived at the hotel that morning, he found Maya and Marcus dressed in their same worn clothes from the day before, sitting quietly on the couch watching cartoons. They looked small and uncertain in the luxurious suite, as if they were afraid to touch anything or make themselves too comfortable. "Good morning," Alexander said, trying to keep his voice cheerful despite his frustration with the legal roadblocks he was facing. "Good morning, Mr. Alexander," Maya replied politely. She had clearly been coaching Marcus on proper behavior, and both children sat up straighter when he entered the room. "Did you sleep well? Was everything comfortable?" Alexander asked. "It was perfect," Maya said quickly. "The beds are really soft, and the room service people were very nice. We didn't break anything or make a mess." Alexander could hear the underlying anxiety in her voice. These children were so used to being unwanted and unwelcome that they were terrified of giving anyone a reason to reject them. "Maya," Alexander said gently, sitting down across from them, "you don't have to be perfect. This is your space for as long as you need it. You can relax and be yourselves." Marcus looked up at his sister with questioning eyes, and Maya gave him a small nod of permission. Immediately, his formal posture relaxed, and he curled up against Maya's side like the little boy he was. "I talked to my lawyer this morning," Alexander began, and he saw Maya's face immediately become guarded. "The process of getting legal custody of you two is more complicated than I hoped. There are a lot of steps the law requires, and it's going to take time." Maya's face fell, but she lifted her chin with that same dignity Alexander had seen on the street corner. "It's okay," she said quietly. "We understand. You tried to help us, and that's more than most people would do." Alexander felt his heart break a little at her resigned acceptance. These children had been disappointed by adults so many times that they expected it now. "Maya, look at me," Alexander said firmly. "I'm not giving up. I'm going to do whatever it takes to help you and Marcus. It's just going to be more complicated than I initially thought." He spent the next hour explaining the legal process as simply as he could. Maya listened intently, asking intelligent questions about timelines and requirements. Marcus didn't understand all the details, but he seemed to sense that the adults were discussing something important that would affect his future. "What happens to us while all this legal stuff is happening?" Maya asked. This was the part Alexander dreaded explaining. "Normally, children in your situation would be placed in foster care while the courts work through the process. But I'm going to try to find another way." Alexander had already been on the phone with 3 different family law attorneys that morning, looking for someone who might have experience with unusual custody situations. He had finally found Linda Morrison, a lawyer who specialized in emergency guardianship cases and had a reputation for creative problem solving. "I have a meeting this afternoon with a lawyer who thinks there might be other options," Alexander explained. "I won't know for sure until I talk to her, but she seemed optimistic that we could find a way to keep you two together and safe while we work through the legal process." Maya studied Alexander's face carefully. "You're not just saying that to make us feel better, are you? Because it's okay if you can't help us. We've been taking care of ourselves for a while now." Alexander was struck again by this child's maturity and her protective instinct toward her brother. She was preparing herself for disappointment while simultaneously trying to make it easier for Alexander to back out if he needed to. "Maya, I need you to understand something," Alexander said seriously. I don't make promises I can't keep. When I tell you I'm going to help you, I mean it. It might not happen as quickly as we'd all like, but I'm not going to give up on you." For the first time since he had arrived that morning, Maya's careful composure cracked slightly. Her eyes filled with tears that she quickly tried to blink away. "It's just that grown-ups say things sometimes," she whispered. "And they mean it when they say it. But then, things get complicated and they change their minds." Alexander moved to sit beside Maya and Marcus on the couch, and after a moment's hesitation, he put his arm around both children. "I know you've been hurt by adults who let you down," he said gently. "I can't prove to you with words that I'm different. I can only prove it by showing up every day and keeping my promises. Will you give me a chance to prove it?" Maya leaned into Alexander's embrace, and Marcus snuggled closer on his other side. For a few minutes, they sat together in comfortable silence, watching cartoons and simply enjoying the feeling of being a family unit, even temporarily. That afternoon, Alexander met with Linda Morrison in her downtown office. Linda was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her office walls were covered with photos of children, presumably former clients who had found permanent homes through her legal work. "Tell me about these children," Linda said after Alexander had explained the basic situation. Alexander found himself describing Maya and Marcus in detail, sharing their story but also his observations about their intelligence, resilience, and the strong bond between them. He talked about Maya's natural leadership abilities and protective instincts, Marcus's gentle nature and curiosity, and the way they both carried themselves with dignity despite their circumstances. "They're not just homeless kids who need rescuing," Alexander said. "They're remarkable children who have been failed by every system that was supposed to protect them." Maya has been acting as Marcus's parent for months, maybe longer. She's 10 years old, and she has better judgment than most adults I know. Linda nodded thoughtfully. "What's your long-term goal here, Alexander? Do you want to adopt these children, or are you looking for a shorter-term solution while other arrangements are made?" Alexander paused, realizing that he hadn't fully examined his own motivations. "Honestly, I don't know yet. I know I want to help them immediately. I know they need stability and safety and someone who will advocate for them. As for adoption, I think that depends on what's best for Maya and Marcus. Have you considered that they might have opinions about what they want?" Linda asked gently. "Maya is certainly old enough to express her preferences, and her wishes would carry weight with a judge." Alexander realized he hadn't actually asked Maya what she hoped would happen. He had been so focused on the legal obstacles that he hadn't considered the children's own desires for their future. Linda leaned back in her chair, considering the situation. "There are a few options we could explore. Emergency guardianship is one possibility, especially if we can establish that the children are in immediate danger on the streets. Kinship care is another option, though that usually involves relatives. What about temporary custody while we work towards something permanent?" Alexander asked. "That's more complicated when you're not a relative, but not impossible. We'd need to demonstrate that placing the children with you serves their best interests better than putting them in the foster system. Given their ages and the fact that they've been caring for themselves, a judge might be willing to consider an unconventional arrangement." Alexander felt a spark of hope. "What would I need to do?" Linda pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "First, we need to file a petition with the family court. We'll need documentation about the children's circumstances, their grandmother's death, their lack of other family support. We'll need character references for you, financial statements, background checks, and medical evaluations for the children." "How long would all of that take?" Alexander asked. "If we prioritize this case and call in some favors, we could have a hearing within 2 weeks. The judge would likely order temporary placement with you while a full investigation is conducted. That would buy us time to work toward a more permanent solution." Alexander felt relief wash over him. 2 weeks was manageable. He could keep Maya and Marcus safe in the hotel for 2 weeks while they waited for a court hearing. "There's one more thing," Linda added. "The children would need to have legal representation too. The court would appoint a guardian ad litem to represent their interests. This person would interview them, assess their situation, and make recommendations to the judge about what placement would be best for them." Alexander nodded, understanding that this was another hurdle but recognizing that it was designed to protect Maya and Marcus's interests. Linda, I need to be honest with you about something. I don't know anything about raising children. My own daughter barely knows me because I was too focused on work to be a real father to her. What if I'm not capable of giving Maya and Marcus what they need? Linda smiled warmly. Alexander, the fact that you're asking that question tells me you might be more capable than you think. Good parents worry about whether they're doing the right thing. They recognize that children need more than material comfort. They need emotional support, consistency, and someone who prioritizes their well-being. But what if the courts decide I'm not suitable? What if my lack of experience works against me? Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Linda said practically. But right now, you're the only person standing between these children and a system that might separate them. You're offering them stability, resources, and, most importantly, someone who wants to keep them together. That counts for a lot. That evening, Alexander returned to the hotel with takeout from Maya and Marcus's new favorite restaurant and a plan. Over dinner, he explained the legal process to them in simple terms, being honest about the timeline and the uncertainties. The important thing, Alexander emphasized, is that we're going to fight for you to stay together no matter what happens. Even if it takes a while to work out the permanent details, we're not going to let anyone separate you. Maya listened carefully to every detail, asking questions that showed her sharp understanding of the situation. She was clearly worried about the unknowns, but she seemed relieved that there was at least a plan in motion. Mr. Alexander, Maya said quietly as they finished dinner, can I ask you something? Of course. You can ask me anything. Why are you doing this for us? I mean, I'm grateful, but I don't understand why someone with your life would want to take care of two random kids you found on the street. Alexander considered the question carefully. Maya deserved an honest answer, not a simple platitude about wanting to help. Maya, I think you and Marcus might be helping me as much as I'm helping you, he said finally. I've spent so many years focused on making money and building my business that I forgot how to have a real family. My own daughter barely knows me because I wasn't there when she needed me. Maybe this is my chance to learn how to be the kind of person who shows up for the people who matter. Maya nodded slowly, as if this explanation made sense to her in a way that simple charity wouldn't have. We're not going to be easy, she warned him. Marcus has nightmares sometimes about our parents dying, and I don't always know the right thing to do. We don't know how to live in fancy places or act like rich people. We might mess up a lot. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal preparations, but Alexander made sure to spend time with Maya and Marcus every day. What started as obligation gradually became the highlight of his daily routine. He found himself rushing through board meetings so he could get to the hotel, declining dinner invitations so he could eat takeout with the children, and working from the hotel lobby so he could be nearby if they needed him. Maya and Marcus slowly began to relax in his presence. The formal politeness faded, replaced by genuine conversations and comfortable silences. Marcus started asking endless questions about everything from how elevators worked to why some people had more money than others. Maya shared stories about school and friends she missed, and gradually began asking Alexander about his own childhood and how he had built his business. Alexander learned that Maya was exceptionally bright, reading at a level several years above her grade, and that she had been helping other kids in her class with their homework before she had to leave school. Marcus had taught himself to read using picture books at the library and could do math problems in his head that impressed even Alexander. But more than their intelligence, Alexander was struck by their emotional maturity. Maya had clearly been forced to grow up too quickly, but she still retained a child's curiosity and capacity for joy. When Alexander brought her new books to read, her face lit up like he had given her treasure. When he took Marcus to the hotel's game room and taught him to play pool, the little boy's delighted laughter filled the space and made other guests smile. They were also slowly teaching Alexander things he had never learned. Maya showed him how to braid hair when Marcus wanted to look like his favorite cartoon character. Marcus taught him a card game their grandmother had shown them. Together, they introduced him to animated movies he had never bothered watching and helped him understand the simple pleasure of spending a Saturday morning in pajamas doing nothing productive. The guardian ad litem assigned to their case was Dr. Sarah Chun, a child psychologist with 20 years of experience in family court cases. She was thorough but kind, She took time to interview Maya and Marcus separately to understand their feelings about their situation. When Dr. Chin interviewed Maya, the 10-year-old was characteristically direct about her preferences. "I want to stay with Marcus no matter what," Maya said firmly. "And I want to stay with Mr. Alexander if he really wants us. He's been nice to us, and he doesn't treat us like we're broken or dangerous. He listens when we talk, and he doesn't promise things he can't do." "Are you afraid of anything about living with Mr. Alexander permanently?" Dr. Chin asked. Maya considered this question carefully. "I'm afraid he might get tired of us. Taking care of kids is hard work, and maybe when the newness wears off, he'll decide we're too much trouble. But I'm more afraid of being separated from Marcus or being put with people who don't really want us." When Dr. Chin spoke with Marcus, his responses were simpler but equally telling. "Mr. Alexander is nice," Marcus said. "He doesn't yell, and he brings us food that tastes good. He taught me how to tie my shoes the right way, and he said I can call him Alexander instead of Mr. Alexander if I want to." He makes Maya smile, and she doesn't smile very much anymore since Grandma Rose died. Dr. Chin's interview with Alexander was more complex. She needed to assess his motivations, his understanding of the children's needs, and his commitment to their long-term well-being. "Alexander, what do you see as the biggest challenges in caring for Maya and Marcus?" Dr. Chin asked. "Honestly, everything," Alexander admitted. "I don't know how to help Marcus when he has nightmares about his parents. I don't know if I'm making the right decisions about their education or their emotional needs. I've never had to think about things like bedtime routines or nutritious meals or what to do when a child is upset." "That's a very honest answer," Dr. Chin said. "How do you plan to address those knowledge gaps?" "I've been reading everything I can find about child development and trauma recovery. I've already identified pediatricians and child therapists in case the kids need professional support. I'm prepared to adjust my work schedule to be more present in their lives. And mostly, I plan to listen to Maya and Marcus themselves. They know better than anyone what they need." Dr. Chun made notes throughout their conversation, but her expression remained neutral, giving Alexander no indication of her assessment. The most challenging part of the legal process was the home study. Alexander's penthouse, while luxurious, wasn't designed for children. The social worker, Mrs. Patterson, walked through his space with a critical eye, noting the lack of child safety features, the absence of appropriate sleeping arrangements, and the overall sterility of the environment. "Mr. Stone," Mrs. Patterson said as she completed her inspection, "this is a beautiful home for an adult, but it would need significant modifications to be suitable for children, especially young children." Alexander had anticipated this concern. "I understand completely. I've already spoken with contractors about installing safety locks, covering electrical outlets, and adding proper railings to the staircases. I'm prepared to convert the guest bedrooms into appropriate spaces for Maya and Marcus, and I'm looking into hiring a housekeeper who has experience with children." "What about your work schedule?" "Technology executives typically work very long hours and travel frequently. How would you balance your professional obligations with parenting responsibilities?" Alexander had given this question a lot of thought. "I own the company, which gives me flexibility that most employees don't have. I'm prepared to delegate more responsibilities to my management team and reduce my travel significantly. Maya and Marcus have already been abandoned by too many adults. I won't be another one who puts other priorities above their needs." Mrs. Patterson seemed impressed by his answers, but she was thorough in her questioning about his support systems, his understanding of trauma responses in children, and his plans for maintaining the children's cultural and racial identity. "Mr. Stone, Maya, and Marcus are African-American children who have experienced significant trauma. Have you considered how you'll help them maintain connections to their cultural heritage while also addressing their emotional needs?" Alexander realized this was a blind spot he hadn't fully considered. "You're absolutely right to bring this up. I've been so focused on the immediate legal and safety issues that I haven't thought deeply enough about their broader identity needs. I would appreciate any guidance you can provide about resources and support systems that would be appropriate." The fact that Alexander acknowledged his limitations rather than pretending to have all the answers seemed to work in his favor. Mrs. Patterson spent considerable time talking with Maya and Marcus during her visit, observing how they interacted with Alexander and how comfortable they seemed in his presence. Meanwhile, Alexander's lawyers were working to expedite the legal process. Linda Morrison had called in favors with court clerks and judges to move their case up on the calendar. David Chun had assembled character references from business associates, employees, and even Alexander's ex-wife, who provided a surprisingly supportive statement about his character despite their personal differences. The most unexpected support came from an unlikely source. Alexander had mentioned Maya and Marcus to his daughter Emma during one of their weekly video calls, explaining that he was trying to help two children who needed a safe place to live. 8-year-old Emma had listened intently and then asked to speak to Maya directly. What started as a brief introduction turned into an hour-long conversation between the two girls. Emma, despite being younger than Maya, was delighted to have an older sister to talk to, and Maya was amazed to discover that Alexander's daughter was kind, funny, and genuinely interested in being her friend. "Daddy," Emma said when she and Maya finished talking, "I think you should definitely keep them. Maya is really smart, and Marcus seems super sweet, and you seem happier when you talk about them than you've been in a long time." Alexander was moved by his daughter's support, but also concerned about how his ex-wife would react to the situation. To his surprise, Catherine was cautiously supportive when he explained the circumstances. "Alexander, I know how much you regret not being there for Emma when she was younger," Catherine said during a private conversation. "Maybe this is your chance to do things differently. Emma certainly seems excited about having Maya and Marcus in her life." The night before their court hearing, Alexander sat with Maya and Marcus in their hotel suite, trying to prepare them for what would happen without making promises he couldn't keep. "Tomorrow, we'll go to court and talk to a judge," Alexander explained. "The judge will listen to what everyone has to say and then decide what's best for you two." "What if the judge says we can't stay with you?" Maya asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Then we'll accept that decision and figure out what comes next," Alexander said honestly. "But, Maya, regardless of what the judge decides tomorrow, I'm not going anywhere. Even if you end up in foster care while we work through the legal process, I'll still be here fighting for you." Marcus crawled into Alexander's lap, something that had become a comfortable routine over the past 2 weeks. "Will you still visit us if we have to go somewhere else?" "Every single day that I'm allowed to," Alexander promised. "You two are part of my life now. That doesn't change based on where you're sleeping." That night, after the children had gone to bed, Alexander stood in his own penthouse looking out at the city lights and thinking about how much his life had changed. 2 weeks ago, his biggest concern had been a merger deal that would add another $100 million to his net worth. Tonight, he was more nervous about a family court hearing than he had ever been about any business negotiation. He thought about Maya's fierce protection of her brother, Marcus's innocent trust, and the way both children had gradually begun to see him as a safe harbor in their storm. He thought about Emma's excitement about having siblings, and Catherine's observation that he seemed happier than he had been in years. Most of all, he thought about the promise he had made to himself when he first met Maya and Marcus, that he would not be another adult who let them down. Tomorrow, he would find out if the legal system would give him the chance to keep that promise. The next morning, Alexander arrived at the hotel early to find Maya already awake and dressed in an outfit he had bought her the previous week. She had carefully brushed her hair and was sitting quietly on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, like she was preparing for the most important interview of her life. "Good morning," Alexander said gently. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," Maya admitted. "I kept thinking about all the different things that might happen today." Marcus emerged from the bedroom, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, and immediately went to sit beside his sister. Despite being only 6, he seemed to sense that today was important. "Are you scared?" Alexander asked Maya, sitting down across from them. Maya considered this question with her characteristic honesty. "Yes, but not the same kind of scared I was when we were living on the streets. Then, I was scared we might not survive. Today I'm scared we might not get to be a family." Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion. Somewhere in the past 2 weeks, these children had begun thinking of him as family, and he had begun thinking of them the same way. The court hearing would determine whether their growing bond would be legally recognized, but Alexander knew that regardless of the outcome, Maya and Marcus had already changed his life forever. The family courthouse was an imposing building with marble floors and high ceilings that made everyone's voices echo. Alexander walked through the metal detectors with Maya and Marcus, both children staying close to his sides as they navigated the unfamiliar environment. Maya wore the navy blue dress Alexander had bought her, and Marcus was in khakis and a button-down shirt that made him look much older than his 6 years. Linda Morrison met them in the hallway outside the courtroom, carrying a thick folder of documents and wearing the confident expression of a lawyer who had prepared thoroughly for battle. "How are we feeling this morning?" Linda asked, though she could see the tension in all 3 faces. "Nervous," Alexander admitted, "but ready." Maya had been quiet during the drive to the courthouse, but now she looked up at Linda with serious eyes. "Mrs. Morrison, what happens if the judge says no?" Linda knelt down to Maya's eye level, something Alexander had noticed she always did when speaking to the children. "Then, we appeal the decision and keep fighting. But, Maya, I've been doing this for a long time, and I think we have a very good case. Judge Williams is known for making decisions based on what's truly best for children, not just what the rulebook says." Dr. Sarah Chun appeared in the hallway, carrying her own stack of files and wearing a gentle smile that helped ease some of the tension. She had interviewed Maya and Marcus multiple times over the past 2 weeks and had observed them interacting with Alexander on several occasions. "Good morning, everyone," Dr. Chun said warmly. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as we can be," Alexander replied. Mrs. Patterson from Child Services joined their group, along with the court-appointed attorney representing Maya and Marcus. Alexander was struck by how many adults were involved in determining these children's future, and he hoped that all these professionals truly understood what Maya and Marcus needed. When they were called into the courtroom, Judge Williams proved to be a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind but sharp eyes. She had clearly read through all the documentation carefully, because she began the hearing by demonstrating detailed knowledge of Maya and Marcus's history and circumstances. "This is an unusual case," Judge Williams began, "involving 2 children who have been caring for themselves on the streets for several weeks, and a potential guardian who, while financially capable and well-intentioned, has no previous experience with child care or family responsibilities." Alexander felt his stomach clench, but Linda had prepared him for the judge's direct approach. "I've read the reports from Dr. Chun, Mrs. Patterson, and the various character witnesses," Judge Williams continued. "I've also reviewed the children's own statements about their preferences. What I need to understand today is whether this proposed arrangement truly serves the best interests of Maya and Marcus Washington." Linda Morrison stood to present their case, outlining Alexander's commitment to the children, his financial stability, and his willingness to make significant changes to his lifestyle to accommodate their needs. She emphasized the strong bond that had already developed between Alexander and the children, and the children's clear preference to stay together with him. Dr. Chun was called to testify about her psychological evaluation of the family unit. Her report was thorough and largely positive. "Your Honor," Dr. Chun said, "while Mr. Stone lacks experience with children, he demonstrates genuine commitment to their well-being. More importantly, Maya and Marcus have formed a secure attachment to him in a remarkably short time. Given their history of abandonment and trauma, their willingness to trust Mr. Stone is significant." "What about the children's emotional needs?" Judge Williams asked. "They've experienced significant losses and trauma. How confident are you that Mr. Stone can provide appropriate support?" "Mr. Stone has already arranged for ongoing counseling services for both children," Dr. Chin replied. "He's also demonstrated excellent judgment in recognizing when issues are beyond his expertise and seeking professional guidance. Maya and Marcus need stability and consistency more than they need perfect parents." Mrs. Patterson's testimony was more reserved, but ultimately supportive. She acknowledged the unconventional nature of the arrangement, but noted that Alexander had addressed every concern she had raised about his home environment and support systems. "The children are clearly thriving in Mr. Stone's care," Mrs. Patterson said. "They've gained weight, they're sleeping better, and Maya has begun speaking about future plans in a way that suggests she feels secure for the first time in months. When the judge asked to speak with Maya and Marcus privately, Alexander felt his heart racing. This was the moment when the children's own voices would be heard, and their preferences would carry significant weight in the judge's decision. Maya and Marcus were led to the judge's chambers, where Judge Williams spoke with them away from the adults who had been debating their future. Alexander waited in the hallway, trying not to pace, wondering what the children were saying and whether they truly understood the gravity of the decision being made. 20 minutes later, Maya and Marcus emerged from the chambers, both looking solemn but not upset. Maya caught Alexander's eye and gave him a small, reassuring nod that made his chest tight with emotion. Back in the courtroom, Judge Williams took several minutes to review her notes before speaking. "This case requires me to balance several competing factors," she began. "The traditional approach would be to place Maya and Marcus in the foster care system while Mr. Stone completes the full adoption process, which could take many months or even years. However, I must consider the unique circumstances of this case." Alexander held his breath, trying to read the judge's expression. Maya Washington is 10 years old, but she has been functioning as her brother's primary caretaker for an extended period. She has expressed clear, consistent preferences about her future, and her maturity level suggests that her opinions should carry significant weight in this decision. Judge Williams looked directly at Maya and Marcus, who were sitting in the front row with their court-appointed attorney. Both children have stated unequivocally that they want to remain together and that they want to stay with Mr. Stone. They understand that this is not a temporary arrangement, and they have expressed genuine affection for and trust in Mr. Stone. The judge then turned her attention to Alexander. "Mr. Stone, I'm going to be very clear with you about my expectations. These children have been failed by multiple adults who were supposed to protect them. If I grant you temporary guardianship with the possibility of permanent adoption, you will be taking on an enormous responsibility. Are you prepared for that?" Alexander stood up, feeling the weight of the moment. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand completely. This means that Maya and Marcus's needs will have to come before your business interests, your social obligations, and your personal convenience. Are you prepared for that level of commitment?" "Yes, Your Honor. They already do come first." Judge Williams studied Alexander for a long moment, then looked back at her notes. Based on the evidence presented, the recommendations of the professionals involved, and, most importantly, the clearly expressed wishes of Maya and Marcus themselves, I am granting temporary guardianship to Mr. Alexander Stone, effective immediately. Alexander felt his knees go weak with relief, but Judge Williams wasn't finished. "This temporary guardianship will be reviewed in 6 months. During that time, Mr. Stone will complete all requirements for permanent adoption, including parenting classes, ongoing counseling support for the children, and regular check-ins with child services. If all parties continue to thrive under this arrangement, we will revisit the question of permanent adoption at that time." Maya and Marcus turned around in their seats to look at Alexander, their faces lighting up with joy and relief. Marcus started to cry happy tears, and Maya's careful composure finally cracked as she smiled broader than Alexander had ever seen. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, "I want to commend Maya Washington for her extraordinary courage and maturity throughout this process. She has advocated brilliantly for herself and her brother, and she should be proud of the strength she has shown." As they left the courthouse that afternoon, Alexander felt like he was walking on air. Maya held his hand on one side, Marcus on the other, and, for the first time in weeks, all three of them could breathe easily. "So what happens now?" Maya asked as they reached Alexander's car. "Now we go home," Alexander said, realizing that his penthouse would finally feel like a home with Maya and Marcus there. The next few months were a whirlwind of adjustments, but they were good adjustments. Alexander had his penthouse renovated to create proper bedrooms for Maya and Marcus, complete with furniture they had chosen themselves. He hired Mrs. Rodriguez, a housekeeper with experience caring for children, who quickly became a beloved part of their daily routine. Maya enrolled in a private school where she could get the academic support she needed to catch up on the education she had missed. Marcus started kindergarten and proved to be both brilliant and popular with his classmates. Both children began counseling sessions to help them process their trauma and losses, and gradually, the nightmares became less frequent. Alexander kept his promise to reorganize his professional priorities. He attended every parent-teacher conference, never missed a school play or sporting event, and established a rule that family dinner together was sacred time when business calls were not allowed. The most unexpected blessing came during Christmas, when Catherine brought Emma to Chicago for an extended visit. The three children bonded immediately, with Emma delighting in having an older sister and younger brother to look after. When it was time for Emma to return to London, all three children were in tears, and Catherine began discussing the possibility of Emma spending summers in Chicago. "You know," Catherine told Alexander during a private conversation, "Emma hasn't talked about anything but Maya and Marcus for weeks. I think having siblings has been good for her." "They've been good for me too," Alexander admitted. "I never realized how empty my life was until it was full." The 6-month review hearing was a formality. Maya and Marcus were thriving academically, emotionally, and socially. Alexander had completed all required parenting classes and counseling sessions. Mrs. Patterson's reports were glowing, and Dr. Chin noted significant improvement in both children's emotional stability. Most importantly, when Judge Williams asked Maya and Marcus about their feelings, both children were enthusiastic about making their arrangement permanent. "Mr. Alexander is the best dad we could have asked for," Maya said with the confidence of a 10-year-old who finally felt secure in her world. "He shows up for everything that matters, and he makes sure Marcus and I always feel safe and loved." Marcus, now 7 and much more articulate than he had been 6 months earlier, added his own perspective. "Alexander teaches me stuff and helps me with homework, and he gives the best hugs when I'm sad about missing Grandma Rose. I want him to be my dad forever." On the day the adoption was finalized, Alexander, Maya, and Marcus stood together in the same courtroom where their journey had begun. Judge Williams smiled as she signed the final papers that made them a legal family. "Congratulations, Stone family," Judge Williams said. "Maya and Marcus, you are now officially Maya Stone and Marcus Stone." That evening, they celebrated with a dinner that included Mrs. Rodriguez, Linda Morrison, Dr. Chun, and, via video call, Emma and Catherine from London. Maya had requested chocolate cake, Marcus had asked for pizza, and Alexander had simply wanted to be surrounded by all the people who had helped make their family possible. As they sat around the dinner table, Alexander looked at his adopted children and marveled at how dramatically his life had changed. A year ago, he had been a lonely billionaire with everything money could buy but nothing that truly mattered. Tonight, he was a father to 2 incredible children who had taught him what wealth really meant. Maya had grown 3 inches and gained 15 pounds. She was excelling in school and had made several close friends. She still occasionally worried about Marcus and felt responsible for his well-being, but she was learning to be a kid again instead of a parent. Marcus had blossomed into a confident, curious little boy who loved school, had joined the children's choir at their local community center, and could frequently be found reading advanced books in the reading nook Alexander had created in his bedroom. Both children still missed their grandmother and their parents, but they spoke about them with love rather than desperate grief. They had learned that loving their new family didn't mean forgetting the people they had lost. Alexander had discovered that being a parent was both harder and more rewarding than any business challenge he had ever faced. There were still moments when he felt completely out of his depth, when he had to call Dr. Chun for advice or turn to parenting books for guidance. But there were also moments of pure joy that no amount of money could have purchased. The night before Father's Day, Maya knocked on Alexander's bedroom door with a homemade card she had created. "I wanted to give this to you early," she said, suddenly shy. The card was decorated with glitter and drawings of their family, including stick figures of all 3 of them plus Emma in London. Inside, Maya had written, "Thank you for buying us that day on the street, but mostly thank you for keeping us. Happy Father's Day to the dad who shows up. Love, Maya." Alexander felt tears fill his eyes as he read the simple words that meant everything to him. "Maya, you and Marcus didn't just change my life," he said, hugging her close. You saved it. I didn't realize how lost I was until I found you too. We found each other, Maya corrected wisely. And now we're stuck with each other forever. Forever sounds perfect to me, Alexander said. As he tucked Maya and Marcus into their beds that night, Alexander reflected on the miracle of how they had all come together. Maya's desperate plea on a busy street corner had led to the most important business deal of his life. Not one measured in dollars and profits, but in love and family and the kind of wealth that could never be calculated on a balance sheet. The little girl who had asked him to buy them had given him something far more valuable in return, the chance to be the man he had always wanted to be, and the family he had never known he was missing. In the end, Maya had been right that first day. It wasn't charity they had needed, it was partnership, commitment, and the simple recognition that they were worth investing in. Alexander had thought he was rescuing them, but they had rescued him right back. And every morning when he woke up to the sound of children's laughter and the chaos of a house that was finally, truly alive, Alexander knew that some purchases were worth far more than what you paid for them. Sometimes, the most valuable things in life came disguised as a 10-year-old girl with nothing to offer but hope, holding her little brother's hand and asking a stranger to believe they were worth saving. They had been worth everything. Whatever happens today, Alexander said, we're going to face it together. And no matter what the judge decides, we're going to keep fighting until we find a way to be the family we all want to be. Maya nodded solemnly, and Marcus reached out to take both their hands. In that moment, sitting in a hotel suite before dawn, they already felt like a family. The judge would simply decide whether the law would catch up to what their hearts had already known was true. Alexander smiled at her honesty. Maya, I have nightmares sometimes too, and I definitely don't always know the right thing to do. We'll figure it out together. And you don't need to act like anyone other than yourselves. That's what I like about you. As Alexander prepared to leave that evening, Marcus ran up to him and wrapped his small arms around Alexander's legs in an impulsive hug. Thank you for not giving up on us, Marcus said in his sweet, serious voice. Alexander knelt down and hugged Marcus back, feeling overwhelmed by the trust this little boy was placing in him. I'm never going to give up on you, Alexander promised. You and Maya are stuck with me now. As he drove home that night, Alexander realized that his life had completely changed in just 2 days. His carefully ordered world of meetings and mergers and profit margins had been replaced by legal consultations and child psychology research and worries about whether he was making the right decisions for 2 children who were counting on him. For the first time in years, Alexander felt like his life had real meaning. Tomorrow would bring more legal hurdles and complicated decisions, but tonight he was going to sleep knowing that Maya and Marcus were safe and warm and hopeful about their future. And for now, that was enough. Maya and Marcus had ever seen 2 bedrooms, a living area with a huge television, and a bathroom bigger than their grandmother's entire kitchen. Room service would bring them whatever they wanted to eat, and Alexander promised to return the next day with a plan. That night, as Maya tucked Marcus into the enormous hotel bed and listened to him giggle with delight at the soft pillows and warm blankets, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they had found someone who would keep his promises. For the first time in months, they were warm and safe and fed, and there was a chance that tomorrow might bring something even better. Alexander returned to his empty penthouse that evening with his mind racing. He had $3 billion and numerous lawyers at his disposal. But what these children needed couldn't be bought. They needed stability, love, family. They needed someone who would show up for school plays and birthday parties. Someone who would be there when they had nightmares or needed help with homework. As he stared out at the city lights from his floor-to-ceiling windows, Alexander realized that Maya and Marcus might be exactly what he needed too. They could give him the chance to be the kind of man his ex-wife had wanted him to be, the kind of father his own daughter deserved. They could help him remember what really mattered in life. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and social workers and complicated paperwork, but tonight, Alexander allowed himself to imagine a different kind of future. One where his penthouse wasn't empty, where his dinner table wasn't set for one, where someone was waiting for him to come home each day. Maya had asked him to buy them, but Alexander was beginning to realize that they might be the ones giving him something invaluable, the chance to build the family he had always wanted but never known how to create. Both children nodded, and Alexander could see Marcus swaying slightly on his feet. "There's a restaurant right there," Alexander said, pointing to an upscale cafe across the street. "Would you like to get some breakfast and talk about this more?" Maya's eyes widened with hope and suspicion in equal measure. "You mean it? You're not going to call the police or social services?" "No," Alexander said firmly. "I mean it. Let's go get some food, and you can tell me more about yourselves." As they crossed the street together, Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since his daughter had stopped calling him daddy and started calling him father, he felt needed. Not for his money or his business connections or his social status, but for himself. These children were offering him something precious, the chance to be the kind of person he had forgotten how to be. Maya held Marcus's hand tighter as they walked beside this strange, kind man who smelled like expensive cologne and looked like he owned the world. She had taken the biggest risk of her life by approaching him, but something deep inside told her this was the moment everything would change. She didn't dare hope for too much, but for the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she and Marcus might be safe. In that restaurant, over plates of warm food and cups of hot chocolate, three broken people would begin to discover that sometimes the most unlikely combinations create the strongest bonds. Alexander would learn that love isn't something you buy, it's something you build. And Maya would discover that being brave enough to ask for help can sometimes lead to finding exactly what you didn't even know you were looking for. Their story was just beginning. But this moment, this leap of faith from a desperate child and the decision of a lonely man to listen, would become the foundation of something beautiful and unbreakable.